Let's talk about Armagh train station. I'd like to talk about the past, the present and the future of the site of Armagh train station, particularly with a view of what to do with the site if we get the station reopened, where the station should be located and how it could be funded and how the railways could be funded in general. I'd like to talk also about the location of train stations in general and why I think they belong in the centre of town. So let's start with the history of Armagh Station. There is the station building, beautiful old building in all its glory. Along this line there were at least 3 stations that were built in the same style. This is Armagh Station, the other was Portadown, very similar style, and the other was Monaghan. And of those 3 stations, Monaghan is the only one of those buildings that still survives to the present day. Now, it was derelict for a while in Monaghan, but a firm of architects has moved in there now. And if you view my other video where I trace the route of the railway from Portadown to Clones via Monaghan, you'll see a little bit more about that. So let's take a look at the history here of the historic site. This is a map from 1904. This is an Ordnance Survey map. And what we're looking at here is Lochgall Road, and which becomes Railway Street, I think, at this point. And there's where the station was. In fact, if we compare that to the current the Google map and the overhead photo, it's roughly this area here. So we'll talk in more detail about where exactly the station was. So coming in from the south, there's 2 lines that come in from the south. This is the line that comes in from Monaghan, and this is the line that comes in from Keady. So the line to Monaghan carried on down to Clones. From Clones, you would have been able then to go up to Enniskillen and various other locations. And then if you went down to Keady over the Tassagh Viaduct, you could then go on down to Keady-Castelblayney and on down to Dundalk, or you could go back up to Clones. It really was a really comprehensive network of railways back in those days. And then on the other side, so the station was here, very close to Railway Street. And then on the other end of the tracks, they split in 2. This one went up to Portadown, and this one to the right went to Markethill and Newry. And incidentally, this line was the site of the infamous Armagh railway disaster you might have heard about, which led to a lot of changes in the way railways were signalled worldwide. Actually, worldwide implications, that little incident. But let's focus on the station here. So there's the station building where the passengers would have gotten aboard passenger trains, and there was a goods shed here on one side and a siding on the other side of it. And then there was another siding down here, and and another building here, which I think I don't know if that was another goods shed or what. Maybe someone else might know more about the area than I do. You might fill me in on that. What I find interesting about this building is I think this building might still be standing in a modified form. And this is a fantastic tool. This is the Ordnance Survey website where you can peel back the layers. You can see the current map superimposed on the old map. So let's peel it back. There's the goods shed still in place in the current map, in the current possession. The station building is gone, and some other businesses have appeared in their place. Station Road has been built. I used to assume that Station Road was part of the original layout, but apparently Station Road was built after the tracks were lifted, if this map is accurate. And where the goods shed used to be, Station Road has been built on top of it. And where the siding used to be, that is now Armagh, and a few other businesses up Station Road as well. So there's Armagh, there's another business here. I don't know if this is part of Armagh. Let's have a look on the street view actually. Let's get down to ground level. So there's Armagh. And this business here, we'll call that the Red Building for now. And there's a few other little businesses here. There's ADL, I think is the name of this company. It's tile and stone. And then there's a little electrical business here. Armagh Electrical Supplies, and then there's an automotive business, Philip White Tires, I think is what it's called. Yeah. So these buildings are now all occupying the site of the old railway. So the station building then would have been roughly where that electrical business is. So these, they're not terribly attractive, these buildings. These are what replaced that beautiful old building. So I'll let you draw your own conclusions about what you think is physically attractive or not. But you know, these industries are necessary. It is necessary to have businesses like this. You know, we need tire places, we need electrical supplies, and we need to buy tiles somewhere. And this little wall here, I think, is original, and my guess is that the end of this wall is where the old level crossing gates used to begin. So I would estimate that this is roughly the point where the trains used to cross Railway Street, and they would go through what is now that yard, and then the line split in two towards Keady in one direction, Monaghan in the other. And I have some other photos of the old station here, and I have to tip my hat to Ivan Smith at the Portadown-Armagh Railway Society, who sent me these photos. So remember that lovely old white building? There it is in later days, after the tracks were lifted, falling into dilapidation already. And there's the goods shed on the right. There's another photo here. Oops. What did I do with it? Yeah, there it is. So this is when the station was operational. So there's your lovely white building, and on the right, that is the goods shed. And look at see the arches and the lintels up on top of the keystone. And we see echoes of that today in the, so those arches have been echoed in the styling of the arm tile building, which is a nice little historical tribute. I quite like that sort of thing. So that's the current site today. So how do we get this station reopened then? Where are we going to put the train station? Well, let's back up a little bit. What are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to get Portadown and Armagh connected. Not only are we connecting Armagh to Portadown, but we're also connecting Armagh to Portadown and Lurgan and Lisburn and Belfast. And if we get the station reopened in Armagh, it enables people to commute not just between Armagh and Portadown, but also Armagh and Belfast. And this has the potential to take hundreds, thousands of car journeys off the road, greatly reducing the amount of traffic. You know, some people who hear about proposals to reopen the railway, you hear them often saying, oh, why don't they fix the roads first? Why don't they fix the potholes first? And that's kind of missing the point. You know, if there's fewer cars on the road, fewer vehicles on the road, fewer people using the roads, there's going to be fewer potholes to fix in the first place. You know, trains are much more efficient at moving large numbers of people in and out of towns and cities, which is one of the really compelling reasons for getting this line reopened. It's not for nostalgia reasons. Now, where are we going to put the station? Are we going to put it in the centre of town? I've heard some people talking about potentially putting it on the edge of town and letting people drive to it. I think that completely misses the point of why we need the railway reopened. We need to connect the centre of one town and city to the centre of another town and city. That's what trains are good at. They're good at dumping people out in big numbers in the centre of densely packed, built-up areas. They're not very good at I don't think putting a train station on the edge of town with a giant parking structure beside it is a very good use of resources. If we put a train station somewhere on the edge of town, like up here, and somehow build a road to it and then build a giant car park, the capacity of that railway line will be limited to the capacity of the car park. Unless people ride their bikes to the train station, but that's how they do it in Holland. You have train stations with giant parking structures for bicycles and tens of thousands of bikes stored in them. But in Holland, they have very safe bicycle infrastructure throughout every town and city. You can, an 8-year-old kid can go out and have the freedom to ride his bike all over town in Holland. Northern Ireland is a long way behind that, 50 years behind the Dutch at least in that regard. So where are we going to put the station then? I honestly think the best place to put the station is right back where it was before. And that's not for nostalgia reasons. There are solid business reasons why this needs to happen. And that would mean some businesses would need to be asked to move. Now, in one of my other videos, I thought that the original station was where Armagh is, and I suggest that Armagh should be the business that moves, but the more I look at it, the more I've investigated where the station was, it seems like these three businesses here would be the ones that would need to move. And then if we put the track back where it was before, Station Road would need to be largely removed. So for accessing anything up here, you have to come in through the other side, and that's fine. You can do that. And there's really not a whole lot up here. If this was all private homes, if this was a big housing development, then it would be game over. It would be very hard to displace hundreds of people from their homes and move them out of here. But this is just light industry. This is the sort of thing that's probably easiest to relocate. There's a recycling centre in there. That doesn't need to be there. Here's a derelict building. When this photo was taken, which was in 2014, this doesn't seem to be in use. That doesn't have any redeeming qualities. There's a business there that would seem to be easy to move. It's a small number of businesses here, and they are the kind of businesses that I really think would be easy to move. We could find another home for them. There's other industrial areas. There's another industrial area on the other side of Armagh, and these businesses would be just as fine. They would do just as well over there as they would here, in my opinion. And something else I'd like to talk about here is, been disoriented. Something else I'd like to talk about here is this building. Remember when I showed you the historic map? So there's the current building, and if we wipe to the right, notice how this building, it's a rectangle with a little nubbin on the bottom left corner. And the modern building also is a rectangle with a little nubbin on the bottom left corner. So I suspect that whatever that was doing in the original railway, whether it was a goods shed or an engine shed or whatever, I suspect that is still the original building. And there it is. There's your rectangle with your little nubbin in the bottom left corner. So what is that building? That is a Translink bus depot. Translink, the inheritors of the Ulster Transport Authority, still hold on to this ground. These pillars, they're historic. I believe these are the entrance to the original station. And that building was part of the original station too. So it's now used for, it looks like it's used for bus maintenance. It's quite interesting that Translink still owns this ground. And what's next door to that? Bit of a lumber yard, timber yard. Again, does this really need to be here? This could be in any industrial area anywhere in Armagh. So it's a small number of businesses we're talking about relocating here. This would not be the most disruptive thing. It would be, there'd be a certain amount of disruption, but compared to evicting people from their homes, this is probably one of the least painful things you could do in the name of getting the railway reopened at its original location. Armagh may not have to move after all. Now that we're talking about putting the tracks back on their original location, which is here, and not Station Road, as I originally thought it was. So, here's another question. Who's going to pay for all this? Where do you get all the money from? And that's where I'd like to talk about. This is where I'd like to talk about what we're going to do with the entire surrounding area around the new station. There's a bit of undeveloped ground here. This seems to be some post-industrial ground. It doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot. Let's not forget, if we open this ground up to a train station, it becomes possible to travel from here to Portadown in 10 minutes, to Belfast in not much longer. You're going to get a really short, fast, comfortable commute from Armagh to Belfast from here. That means this station and everywhere within a 5-minute walk of it is about to become prime real estate. So this derelict ground now that's not doing anything suddenly becomes very attractive to developers who want to build large numbers of apartments and homes of some sort. If you could pack the homes in around the station, the potential for this becomes absolutely huge. So that's why, and then in here as well, on this side of the road, there's a yard not doing a whole lot. There's a bit of ground here beside, I think there's a school there, isn't there, beside the primary school. This doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot, but if there's suddenly a train station next door, this undeveloped piece of ground suddenly becomes a lot more valuable, doesn't it? So there's huge potential for this area here. At this point, I'd like to change the subject slightly to talk about something that's happening in my own neighborhood here in San Jose, California. What's happened here is in California, where the car is king, they have built a train station. They built a number of train stations here on the BART line. BART is the Bay Area Rapid Transport. It goes from, it connects San Francisco to the surrounding cities around San Francisco Bay. And BART is making its way slowly down towards San Jose. So this is one of the stations on that route. There will be a station in the center of San Jose in the next 10 years. They need to do some underground tunneling and so on. But what I want to focus on here is this station, Berryessa Station. This has been opened recently. It opened last year there in 2020. And the area surrounding Berryessa Station is unproductive, underutilized land. You've got a flea market here, which is kind of like a Nuts Corner type of deal. It operates about 4 days a week, 4 or 5 days a week. And then you got a surface car park, which is again is a very unproductive use of land. Some undeveloped ground over here. Well, guess what? As this article says, this is more than just a transit project. So the city of San Jose is working with the transit agency in partnership, and they are going to develop the living daylights out of this entire area. So they're not just going to build a train station and leave it there. They are going to build an entire urban village. And if you go to the City of San Jose's website, there's their plan. So they're not just building a train station in isolation. It's part of a bigger scheme to redevelop this area. This is a city with a huge housing shortage. It needs more housing, and they're going to address it. This is part of how they're going to address it. There's going to be more housing, there's going to be mixed-use development, commercial development, there's going to be commercial space on the ground floor with apartments above. High-density housing, exactly the kind of housing that we need. So I'll give you links to these articles in the description. And then the other question is, how are we going to pay for all this? So at this point, I'd like to point you to this academic paper from the University of California, Berkeley, which incidentally is on the BART line. There's BART stations at Berkeley. This is about the transit agency in Hong Kong, which is one of the few transit systems in the world that actually turns a profit. And how do they turn a profit in Hong Kong with their transit agency? Well, there's more to it than just the fact that Hong Kong is an incredibly dense, packed population. The way the transit agency works in Hong Kong is they buy a piece of undeveloped ground, they run a railway line to it, build a train station there, and then on top of the train station they build apartments. And they develop the ground commercially, and they make an absolute fortune from it. And the money that they make from that commercial development, then they plough that back into the transit system to build more lines, to build more stations, to buy more ground, to develop more property, and on it goes. That is how Hong Kong finances its transportation system. It's like a model to the world. There's a very interesting book called The Public Wealth of Cities, which I'm going to give you a link to in the description. It's a really interesting book about what they call urban wealth funds, which is like a sovereign wealth fund, but on a smaller scale. And that's where it gives examples of where city governments and local governments have gotten into the property development business and used that to fund their operations. And it's a very efficient and sustainable model that allows them to fund public services like public transport without resorting to taxation. Because as you know, taxation is a bit limited in the amount of money you can raise. So if Translink were smart, and if the ABC Council were smart, they would be working together on this project. And ground like this, they would be snapping that up. This ground here that's owned by Translink, this would not be a bus depot, especially if a train station is suddenly going to appear beside it. A bus depot suddenly becomes a very unproductive use of this ground. If Translink and the ABC Council were smart, they would be developing this ground. They would be putting apartments in here and packing them in and renting them at the full market rate. If they're going to sell any homes, they would sell them to the highest bidder. That is a much smarter way to fund public transport than whatever scraps you can get from the table, from other sources. It's much more lucrative, it's much more sustainable. So there's huge potential here for this whole area. So, putting the train station in is just part of the conversation. The ABC Council needs to be part of the conversation, not just about what to do with the train station, but also what to do with the entire surrounding area. Joined up government. Think about it as one whole possibility. And the other point I'd like to make here is that another reason for putting the train station at the centre of town, as well as being within walking distance of the city centre and the cathedral and all the good stuff that we have down here, it also leaves open the possibility of a future reopening of these other two lines, one to Keady and the other to Monaghan. Monaghan-Clones and so on. And the one to Keady could be opened eventually all the way down to Keady-Castelblayney and Dundalk. It's a long way into the future, but look back 20 years, doesn't seem so long ago for those of us of a certain age. 20 years into the future sounds like a long way off, but it's going to be here before you know it. And this infrastructure that we're talking about building is going to stand for decades, for centuries. The station in Lurgan, that I've gone in and out of more times than enough, it's over 100 years old. When they built that station in Lurgan, they built it at a certain location that we are stuck with centuries later. So it's hugely important that we get it right first time. And when the Great Northern Railway built their stations in the centre of these towns, I really think they got it right the first time. They built it in an era before the automobile, before congested roads and motorways and so on. They were built in a way that enabled people to get to the station on foot, so that they didn't have to drive, didn't need to own a horse, didn't need to own any expensive transport forms in those days. So there are multiple reasons why this station should be put back where it was. And the financing of it, if Translink and local government could use a bit of imagination, they should be able to make this a reality. And hopefully, before long, we'll see signs like this. It is a very real possibility, and I for one, am looking forward to seeing it.